Yes.
Well, welcome everybody. We're glad to see you here for our faculty forum on culture through travel and experiences that our panelists have had. In this experience, we're going to be listening to questions and answers throughout the latter part of our session. I'll introduce our speakers at this point. Dr. Yuri Saul Cohen served in the U.S. Marines in Okinawa, Japan, and South Korea. He also spent time in Costa Rica when 9/11 occurred. And Saul will focus on culture shock and domestic migrations. And then Ms. Kara Benedict, who was born in South Korea, will be our next speaker. And she grew up, though, in New York, upstate New York. She moved to New Mexico for graduate school and then to South Korea, Miami, and now we get her here in Nebraska. She's also been to Canada, Bahamas, Mexico, Japan, and China. Our third speaker will be Dr. Preston Shires, and he has traveled throughout Western Europe and lived in France for about 7 years. And while he was in France, Preston studied French at the universities of Nancy, Poitiers. Did I say that correct?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
And then history at the University of Bordeaux. He later studied or worked as a youth group leader in a French church and periodically as a U.S. translator during joint French and American military exercises. So, welcome speakers, welcome participants, and we'll get started with Saul as our first speaker.
All right, so as Bob said, I'm going to talk about my experiences in Okinawa, Japan, and then Costa Rica. So here I am, a 19-year-old kid, joined the Marine Corps, right? So after boot camp, about 5-6 months, 1985, flew to Okinawa, Japan. That was my first duty station. Just kind of some things I remember is that we were actually allowed to drink on the base, even though we were like not 21, which was kind of interesting. Okinawa had a long history on the island dating back to the Vietnam War. It was actually Naha Port in Okinawa was they used to fly from Naha Port to Vietnam War. So Okinawa had history. There was a sense in scuttlebutt among the Marines was like the Okinawans resented us for giving it back to Japanese rule. That was kind of the thing that they had talked about, that they didn't like, that they appreciated American rule. I don't know what the truth of that was. That's what kind of it was kind of the rumor about it. So, you know, being the Marines and military, right, they catered to vets outside of Camp Hansen was my first duty.
Yeah, no, that's not working.
So, like, right out there, right, you know, bars essentially that catered to Marines, and that was my first exposure to, you know, going out in the town and watching like Iron Maiden and Led Zeppelin on these huge, amazing screens and these sound systems that, you know, best sound system I've ever heard as a young kid. I was like, wow, you know, it's just amazing, that kind of experience out in town. But and that's where I was able to buy a really good sound system there. When I arrived in Okinawa, Japan, it's important, right, in terms of what the dollar's worth. When I arrived in Okinawa, it was 250 yen to the dollar. So that was really good. So, and the problem was I waited to buy my stereo equipment. And when I bought my stereo equipment, it was 160 yen a dollar. So I paid a lot more than I would have if I would have bought right away. So, all right, those are some things, right? You have to, what's the dollar worth, right, when you go, you know, overseas, right? Halfway through, well, one of my roommates at Camp Futima was a Detroit. He was a Marine from Detroit. He was a corporal. I was you know, just a private. And he introduced me like to Billy Joel, for example, the song Allentown. And I just had never heard that song. And that's actually a song of what happens to county, you know, the Vietnam War and stuff, sure. And so that was kind of, you know, I had that exposure. He was older. He was about, you know, 28, 29, and I was 19. So he was able to, you know, socialization kind of show me the ropes. But and that's the thing, right? There was a guy, Nathan Taylor, who I went to boot camp with, school in North Carolina, and then my first duty station. And I'm trying to find him, and I haven't been able to find him. That would be really great if I could find him, because those experiences he shares a Marine are just so, that once a Marine, always a Marine. It's true. You feel that, Halfway through my tour, the Marines every year have what's called Team Spirit, where they link up with South Korean ROK Marines, Republic of Korean Marines, and I was at Mount Palgungsang, which is the highest mountaintop in South Korea, Army Signal Station. So I worked there for 2 weeks. I worked under Mr. Woo, who was a Korean, and then other airmen. So I was able to, because I was a Marine, there were airmen, and there were a lot of them were sergeants and enlisted officers. So that was a really cool experience. Out in town, right, in Korea, tennis shoes, were they're $80 or $90 in the States, $10 in Korea, and 85. Leather jacket, $200 leather jacket, $50. Right? So those are things that, right, as an American, you're like, wow, it just kind of, jump out at you. So. One negative experience was I was in South Korea, and we were going to Seoul in an Army Jeep, and the Army Jeep had these plastic windows, and the plastic window was ripped, and this is below degree temperature, and I had a hole in my boot, and it was an 1.5-hour drive, and so my foot froze, and there was a captain in the front seat, and I was in the back seat, and just dying, almost, in tears, right? But not wanting this captain in the front seat, probably swearing under my breath, But the worst thing was when my feet started to unfreeze. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. That's the worst pain I've ever had, when the limb starts to unfreeze and the tingling in the burnt toes. Then I get the Mickey Mouse boots. That's the opposite. Your feet they're drenched in sweat. But then you'd rather have that than the frozen foot. So. Take care of your feet when you're overseas. What is it? Have a book to read, take care of your feet. So, yeah. All right, so that's my that's Okinawan experience, my Costa Rica experience. My uncle sent me to Costa Rica for my, no, actually I paid for it. They sent me to Mazatlan. For my master's, so I went to Costa Rica, 2001. So when I got there, I bought the Lonely Planet guidebook, right, where they have all different levels of hotels. So I thought I was going to rough it. So I thought I'd pay $5 a night. So I had the taxi driver, right, to take me to the hotel, and he stops before the hotel and he says, in pretty good English, I wouldn't stay here. So, okay, you take me to a place, right, that's a little better. So I went to a $20 hotel. I didn't get much sleep that night, but it was better than the other one. So if you're gonna rough it, right, be prepared to rough it, and, you have to roughing it is, do I want to spend the money, my safety, right? These are issues that you have to compare, particularly students, right, when you have a limited budget, okay? The next night I spent, $35 a night. It was essentially a resort hotel, right? That's what you do, right? Middle income countries, right? A little bit more money, you get a lot more. While I was there, in Costa Rica, there's the Afro-Caribbean side and there's the Pacific side. I went on the Afro-Caribbean side, and I went to Tabacan Hot Springs, which if you ever go to Costa Rica, they turned essentially, what is it, the volcanic water, they turn that into a resort. So literally there are places that you can go and sit under, and volcanic water is just cascading over you. It's the most, volcanic water and sulfur is very good for your skin and stuff. If you can, Costa Rica or Tabacan Hot Springs, you have a great time. It's amazing. They had, in the rainforest, there's rainforest in Costa Rica, right? Everyone thinks of Brazil. Costa Rica has rainforest as well. They had cutter ants. It was like a living globe of ants, and they all have, they're doing their little bit, right? They have their little leaf, and they're carrying a little bit of leaves, this whole like living globe. I'll never forget that. And then they had what's called poor man's umbrellas. It's huge vegetation. It's a rainforest, right? And you can actually use it. It's so big, you could use the leaf as an umbrella. So that's what they call the poor man's umbrella leaf. About halfway through my trip, 9/11 hits. I'm in Costa Rica. I'm having breakfast with the owner of Hotel Santo Tomas, who was a New York transplant, and casually brings up, oh yeah, did you see a plane hit a building in New York? Casually, like nothing. I went back to my hotel room, turned on the TV. I'm like, we're at war. It really hit me. And then it hit me, I'm in a foreign country and we're at war, right? Luckily, Costa Rica, is pretty stable, and I didn't worry so much. Bush had given the Taliban a 72-hour ultimatum. I don't know if you remember those days. So I was supposed to fly back on the 19th. I flew back on the 18th. I flew back with a lady who the prior week was 10 minutes from Miami when 9/11 hit, and they had to fly back to Costa Rica. She had to fly back to Costa Rica. So when we arrived in Miami, I arrived in Miami on September 18, 2001. Miami was a zoo, as you can imagine, right? A week after 9/11. I had these, I had a fanny pack, I had my wallet in there, my passport, and I had my, other bag. I go through customs or whatever, put the bag through that, and I took my bag, and I'm walking about 100 yards, and I'm like, I left my fanny pack in the security area, freaking out, right? Wallets, passport. So I come back in, and I attempt to go through the security line, right, the opposite way. Stop. I mean, you can imagine Miami security. Then the guy lifts up and said, my phone. Oh my God. So that was, it was like, wow, so you found this. Yeah, so those, Okinawa and then that Costa Rica, that 9/11 experience was pretty powerful for me. So one thing too that we talk about in sociology related to culture shock is Davis, a lot of you know Davis Medea was Kenyan, and he described to me how he's been here over 10 years. So when he goes back to Kenya, he actually experienced culture shock, right? So someone, if you've been here for a long time, and you go back to your country, it can change so much that you can experience culture shock, right? So. And then we talk about international migration. There's also domestic migration. Right, so I made a domestic migration, right? Majority of my teaching career has been in California, and I taught in A&M San Antonio last year, and now I'm at SEC in Nebraska. And so students, you have to be prepared, right? If you want your dream job, right, to do at least a domestic migration. That's within territories. Thank you.
I'm going to focus on my experience in Korea. I'm going to draw a diagram up here, that adaptation process, and share my stories by using this model. So we have a U-curve model of adaptation, and up here we have the honeymoon. So anytime that you enter into a new culture, this is the kind of process you go through. It's a very simple process. Of course, our experiences are more complex, but this is just something to understand what we go through. So we have the honeymoon, then we have the crisis, or the culture shock. We get to adjust, and finally, hopefully, adapt to our environment. So in Korea, when I moved to Korea to work there, this honeymoon stage. And not many people, when they enter into a new culture, first experience the honeymoon stage. We jump around. Like when I moved to New Mexico, I was not in the honeymoon stage. I went straight to crisis. But Korea was different. I was in the honeymoon stage. It was new. I was excited. I got to meet new people. The food was great. I like Korean food. And it was very westernized too, so it's not like it was a huge adjustment for me. The stores are pretty similar here, as they have Costco, they don't have Walmart. They have Dunkin' Donuts, Baskin Robbins, Outback Steakhouse, they have Gap, so a lot of similar things that we have here. Markets are pretty unique there, so I had a fun time exploring the markets. So I was in the honeymoon stage for quite a while. But we can't stay in the honeymoon stage. We do have to experience some crisis to really learn about our experience. So I did start to drop into the crisis stage. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's pretty quick. So when I entered my apartment, I entered into the crisis stage. It was nice, it's a nice apartment, but they don't have dryers the way we have dryers here. So when you wash your clothes, you can't put your clothes in the dryer. So I had to figure out how to dry them. It was during the winter time. I hung my clothes outside, that didn't work. And so then what I ended up learning is that I just started laying my clothes out on the floor because there the heater is, they have pipes on the floor and they have hot water going through these like pipes. And so that's how we heat our room, is through these pipes on the floor. So I just laid out my clothes that way, but I didn't really like doing that, it wasn't enjoyable. So I had to get accustomed to that because there wasn't any other way. The other one is the bathrooms in my apartment it's very small, very tight. You don't have a shower stall the way that we have shower stalls here. So how I took a shower is that when I was ready to take a shower, there was a hose. So I'd attach the hose to the faucet of my sink, really small sink. I'd attach then the shower head on the wall. It would stick there. That's how I took my shower. Everything got wet, the whole floor was wet. So when it came to like brushing my teeth, when because I don't brush my teeth while I shower, I had to take my toothbrush, my toothpaste out in the kitchen area because if I went back in, my feet would get wet. So when it comes to the drainage system in like the washroom, everything gets wet. So when I'm washing my clothes and it starts to drain, it's a little room, so I wouldn't want to go back in there because it's flooded. That floor is flooded there, and it would just slowly drain. So I couldn't use that room when the washing machine would drain, because it would take a long time for it to drain too. Towels, we have big towels here. There in Korea, they're little towels. And good thing I brought my towel from America because I couldn't find any towels that I could use there. So I only had one towel I could use. So that means that I had to wash quite a bit. My floor would get flooded. Lay my clothes out again. It would take a while too. The blankets and sheets, they don't have sheets. I need sheets. So they have just blankets as your sheets. So good thing I brought my set of sheets and use that, and then I had to buy a blanket. We have big blankets here. They have small blankets, so I had to get a couple blankets for my bed. So that was quite an adjustment as well. So I couldn't buy sheets. I had to keep washing my sheets and using that again. And then when it came to culture and race, here I'm seen as Asian. But when I went back to Korea, I was not seen to be a part of that group. I felt outcasted there because I'm American. And people saw me quickly as an American. I didn't have to say a word to anyone. I'm walking out in public, I enter into a store or market, I have people who come up to me and say, "You're an American." And I didn't even say a word to them. So I asked the different people, "How do you know I'm an American?" And they said, "We just know. The way you walk, the way you stand, the way you look at things, you're an American." And I said, "Yeah, I am an American." And they asked me what I do in America. I said, I teach there. They said, "Oh, you're rich." No, teachers are not rich in America. But they didn't believe me though. They just thought that I'm a rich American. So then they thought that I could like buy things at its max prices too, which I didn't accept that. And I was also told that I'm biracial. No, as far as I know, I'm not biracial. They thought I'm half white, half Asian, because they also thought that the way I walk, the way I present myself, I have to be half white, not full Asian. So I got criticized that I'm not really Asian, I'm not really Korean, I'm American, I'm part white. And that's why I had to teach them about race, culture, that culturally, yeah, I'm like white. Race, though, I feel like I'm Asian, I'm not biracial. But they argue with me on that. The language barrier, I experienced this quite a bit. I could get around with the language, but having a conversation, deep conversation, I couldn't do that. And they shamed me for that because they thought that, okay, you're Korean, you say, so you should really know our language to have a conversation with us. And I couldn't do that. I was still learning. And so a lot of them then just didn't want to talk with me even because I wasn't fluent in Korean. So then I'd hang out with white people, my coworkers. A lot of them were Caucasians. And I'd hang out with them. And even then I was shamed. I'm out in public hanging out with my Caucasian coworkers, and I'd have these strangers come up to me and shame me, tell me that I should not be hanging out with white people. Even though Koreans love white people. They love them. They really do. But as a Korean, I should not be hanging out with them the way I have been, because I did like everything with them. And so they shamed me that way and thought that I should hang out with Koreans, but they wouldn't even let me hang out with them. So I kind of had to be alone and hang out by myself, which I did a lot of times, because one way or the other I got shamed. So that was tough for me, adjusting to that. And then at work, it's a collectivistic culture, meaning the group comes first. We think about the group. While this culture, we're more individualistic. It's about me. My goals come first. And so part of collectivism is that things are implied, things are assumed, because if you're explicit, that's rude. And you don't want to be rude to people. So at work, my Caucasian friends and I would have a tough time trying to figure out assignments, like our projects. Because they wouldn't be direct with us about, here's a project, this is what you need to do, this is when it's due. So we'd ask, okay, so this is what you want us to do, and when is it due? And they say, whenever you get it done. So we asked a couple of times, and says, no, whenever you get it done. So within the week, we just show them like our draft. Here's the draft of our project. And they look at our project and say, this is your draft? And say, yeah. It's like, do we need huge edits on this? And say, oh no, it's just that this person got it done. So instead of saying that, no, I expect you to get it done, they refer to others saying, this person got it done. I don't even know if those people really exist. But that's how they tell you that what they expect from you. And when things are due is they say, well, this person got it done yesterday. And this is your draft today? So that's how we had to learn what instructions are and when things were due and their expectations, is that they would refer to other people. And then I did get to adjust to that culture somewhat. Where I hung out a lot on my own. I got used to that. I was fine with that. And when it came to work, we all started to adjust to that. Just when they give you an assignment, just do the best you can and submit it as quick as you can. And was I able to adapt? Adaptation is where you're stable. You know what to expect. So was I stable? I don't really think so, because I still had a hard time with my apartment and getting used to that. And even with the workplace, something else would come up and I would forget that, collectivistic view is about things that are assumed, and I'm always expecting things to be explicit, told to me. So I don't think I really got to adaptation. I think I adjusted to that culture. Japan, it was a pretty short visit, like a week. I feel like I was in the honeymoon stage that whole time. Japan is amazing culture, amazing people, and just so humble. And I got to just travel around there, visit with the different people, and they're so helpful. If you're not sure of something, you're trying to get somewhere, they're really trying to help, even though they don't speak much English. I have learned, though, that if you do want to try and find someone who's an English speaker, look for someone who's younger, who's young. That's what I told my sister when we went to Japan, is that we got confused at the subway system. And we were on this computer, we knew where we wanted to go to. We saw these locations on the computer, but we couldn't find this one that we wanted. So my sister said, okay, let's go ask someone. I said, well, ask someone who's young, because that person would more likely know some English. And she says, no, I'm going to ask this person, because she was right next to us, and she was a much older woman. And I said, good luck. So she went and asked her, and the old woman just said, no, and walked away. And so I said, I'm going to ask this person, who's about my age, maybe a little younger. And I told her, okay, we're trying to find this location. It's not on this computer. And she says, oh, upstairs. I'm like, upstairs? She says, go to the computers upstairs. Which I didn't understand that. I don't know why they have these different locations on these different computers on different levels. But they do try and help you out. In Korea, I didn't find so much of those kind of people where they were more willing to help you out. But maybe also because I was Asian looking. China, I was in the crisis stage the whole time. I didn't experience the honeymoon stage in China. It's similar to, have you gone to Chinatown in New York City? It's similar to that. Crowded, people are not nice. You're trying to make your way through things and you have a hard time doing that. People are trying to scam you. And then, of course, it's difficult to communicate with them because of the language barrier. So that's just my overview of my experience when it comes to Asia, but mostly when it comes to Korea. And this is the type of model that we talk about when it comes to our experience entering into another culture. You can actually apply this to other experiences too. When you go from high school to college, when you move from your home, living with your parents, and then moving away, living alone, or even marriage too. You can apply this to that. And then we have the W curve, which, Saul, you were talking about re-entering into your culture, and you can experience culture shock. That's the W curve hypothesis. So here's the U curve. The W curve is where then you enter back into your culture and you start to experience that culture shock. But then eventually you get adjusted and come back up.
Okay, I'm glad you two went first. Make some notes. Yeah, I don't know though. I mean, I'm sure that's the general rule. I don't know that I had I did just a honeymoon. Then it was marriage. But there were differences when I arrived in France, not for the first time, but to learn the language. I tried to learn in high school. They had a program where you could learn as fast as you wanted to. And so I studied there for 2 years at the high school, French. And unfortunately, there were 20 kids in the room and I was the only male, so I had a lot of fun. But at the end of 2 years, I only had 6 months worth of work done. So I went to college, and I thought, well, I'll learn it here, and I survived with a C, and I was pretty proud of that. But I realized if I were going to learn the language, I'd have to go on site. So I went to Nancy, France, to study French as a second language, kind of like our English is a second language thing. And there, I remember arriving at the train station and getting out, and I could ask questions, but I didn't know what people were saying back to me. And so I got a taxi, and I gave him the address of the hotel. We drove for a while, and he dropped me off, and I paid him a big tip, and I didn't want to, even though I didn't have much money. And I got up in the morning, and I opened up the shutters, because the French, they have shutters everywhere, and I looked down, and I'm right above the train station. Okay, so there was that experience, and then differences. You're talking about differences, just kind of material differences. I remember I didn't know what a Turkish toilet was. I don't know if you do, but I hope not. But I went into this public restroom. You know what one is? Oh, well, you're gonna learn. And go to this public restroom. They just have a hole in the floor. Look at that. Dark in here. Well, fortunately, I'm standing in there. I go, fortunately, they got a light thing, a string to pull the light. I pull that string, and just water gushes in all over, floods my feet. And I go, that's what it is. That's just the toilet down there. So those are the Turkish toilets, and they make them new. They replace. And last time I was in France, they had brought in some new ones and replaced the ones in the train station. I'll do them with them. So that's kind of just but there's some there's a lot of cultural differences with France in terms of attitude, demeanor, and all that. In fact, it's interesting because I think Americans have less understanding of the French than they do, say, of Hispanic culture, because there's a lot of mixing going on here. So, but like in Korea, you said that you're not supposed to be explicit,
Right.
frank. Opposite in France. So they're going to tell you exactly what they think. There's no political correctness. They don't care. So I think we really don't understand their culture. And they don't mind making fun of you out in front of everybody or talking bad about you. You're just supposed to take it, and that's a problem when French people come here, because Americans take it personally. And the French, they don't. You just come right back at it. But I remember one time I was at a cafe at the counter, and I ordered something, and I left, as I usually do. Get about a half mile, 2 miles down the road, and go, oh, I left my wallet there. So I turned around. That's the part that I usually do. I leave something. So I go back, and I go to the counter, and I tell the guy, I said, did you happen to see a wallet here? And he goes over, and he grabs it, doesn't say anything, puts it in front of me. So I open it up just to make sure, it's got my cards in it and everything. And he sees that I'm not giving him any money. And so he turns to the rest of the population in the cafe and says, you see this young man, come in here. He comes in here, he has left his wallet, he comes back, I give it to him, and what does he do? He gives me nothing. Nothing. Welcome to France. So anyway, I don't even know what I wrote there. Okay. And then in Nancy, I was supposed to be learning the language, and so I thought, now this is a good way to learn the language. Go to the country, you learn it real quick because you're immersed in it. But at night, their dorms, they don't have roommates. They have single rooms for everybody. So I'm in there, and I'm learning it with the radio. That I would just copy whatever the guy was saying, trying to learn this language. So the one problem was that, you talk to me, and it would be like, I'd talk back kind of like good evening, it's 8 o'clock. That's the way it is. I kind of had this radio voice going. But it did help. And so I eventually caught on, and I had that period where people talk about, you start dreaming in the foreign language, but the problem was I couldn't understand what people were saying to me in the dreams. I couldn't even understand what I was saying. But after about 3 months, it just clicked. All of a sudden, I can understand these people. I still can't talk, but I can understand what they're saying. And so after that, I went back to the States and I went to class in college. I took French and I felt like I was cheating. I understood everything that was going on and I was getting A's. I hadn't done that much before. So then I learned that they had a program where Americans could go from University of California over to France and study for a year. I learned that on March 29th or something. I think that was the deadline. I learned it on the deadline anyway, usually the way I come about things. And so I went and I filled out my paperwork real quick and they interviewed me. They saw I could speak French, understand them at least. So they sent me over to Bordeaux. And there too, I think one of the things I learned at Bordeaux was that if you're going to go study in a country, don't buddy up with a fellow American. Because we went over there as a group, there are about 40 of us. Well, that's another thing I learned, is that all these differences that we have as Americans, when you show up and you're in a foreign culture, they kind of disappear. It's us, not us against them, but you recognize that you have more commonality than anything else. So I had a choice. I could either be in the dorm again, or I could live in town in an apartment with a roommate. But I thought, well, if I do that, since the university's on the edge of town, I'm gonna have to get up early and take the bus every day. So I didn't want to do that. So I just took the dorm room. I was the only one out of the 40 that did that. But all those others, they had roommates, American roommates. And I learned that, I saw at the end of the year, their French had not really progressed because they were just speaking English amongst themselves. I was the only one who spoke English in my dorm, so I had to get along. So that's something to keep in mind. Another good thing to do is to have a girlfriend that's French. That helps you, or boyfriend, you know. Then later on, as I did have, one of the, I don't know how to put this, but anyway, I did have a girlfriend that I eventually married, okay? We'll put it that way. And so then we lived in France, and while we were there, she was Protestant, French Huguenot. And so we were youth leaders in the church there, the Huguenot church. Yeah, I was going to say something about that one. But anyway, as you're assimilating, I guess, because for me, what I wanted to do is I wanted to fit in. And so I'd say one of the first things is to lose the American clothing back then. And again, you have to realize when I was there in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot more differences. There wasn't this international culture we have now. So, there were no emails, there were no personal computers, there were no cell phones. So you could spot an American, at 100 paces just by the clothing, and also the demeanor and things like that. So I took it upon myself to blend in as much as possible, and I think that helped. Dressing like the French, and as time went on, they accused me of being more French than my wife. My wife had very little good things to say about the French, which is probably why we ended up in America. Okay, I think that's all I can read on here. Yeah, 45 we're supposed to be done. So.
All right. We want to open up for question and answers. Okay, folks, we'll take on any questions that you might have.
Can you tell me, each one of you, how long you were in country?
Well, I was off and on, but probably the longest stretch was 5 years.
I was a year in Okinawa, Japan. 4 years in the Marines, a year in Okinawa, and 2 weeks in Costa Rica.
A short time in Korea, 6 months, and then Japan, China, a week each.
I have a question, Kara. The stages you talked about, do you know if someone lived in another culture for years, and maybe Preston, you would could speak to this from your personal experience, but can people continue to cycle through those stages? Or do you kind of get to adaptation and?
No, yeah, that's why this is a very simple diagram here. What we experience is much more complex.
Right.
And like culture changes, so something that is new to us, we might jump into the crisis stage.
Sure.
Yeah, we do jump around here.
It makes sense to me that it wouldn't just be, oh, okay, I kind of got to adaptation and I'm good. I would assume you can go.
Well, usually though, once you do get to adaptation, because you're so stable, you don't jump so much around. It's just if something drastic changes in your culture, then you can move somewhere else.
I guess I'm not that analytical because I don't really notice any ups and downs. It's, like over there I'd start craving steak. Get over here, a hamburger, then I'd start, I wish I could have snails. So I go back and forth that way. But
you don't remember, you were really in crisis mode or?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
The crisis is when our expectations are not met.
Oh, that's
so
it.
we
I don't
expect things to happen.
So I think everyone talked about at some point along the way feeling judged, right? In particular, Kara, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you guys might have judged the people in the country where you were?
Well, actually, one of the tools we use when it comes to communicating with people of different cultural backgrounds is the DIE tool. This stands for description, interpretation, evaluation. So when you communicate with others of different cultural backgrounds, you first want to describe what's going on, and then you can interpret, meaning assign meaning to it. And then you can evaluate, meaning judge. So this kind of tool suspends judgment, and it really helps to better understand the people we're communicating with. Because like in this culture, how we grow up is that we're told that, okay, when someone is crying, this is what it means. And if boys cry, this is how you should judge it. If girls cry, this is how you judge it. So quickly, we just judge quickly without even thinking. And that's how we can have problems communicating with other people. So this tool here helps us out so that we don't come across so many problems. It really does help us better understand, why are you behaving this way without just quickly criticizing someone for behaving in a certain way. So I try and use this tool. It can be difficult, especially when it comes to observing things like some of the things in the Middle East, how they treat women. So I can have a really tough time using this tool, and that's where I have to keep reminding myself, use the DIE tool, use the DIE tool. Right,
Yeah, there was I mean, I know there's kind of in France, there's kind of a prejudice against Americans in a sense. And also a little fueled by a little jealousy in a way. So like, I understood that, they didn't want me doing a lot of things that were high profile because that would, in my work, because, I was the American. And they didn't want people to think that they were, colonized by me or something like that. I don't know. But, and also I was on the baseball team there. I was never very good at baseball, but over there I was fantastic. and I didn't realize, how they're, how much pent up, this is the American. And I was up to bat and, it eventually happened. I struck out. And it's like, they just blew up, exploding in applause. I just, great, even my own team, this is great, they struck out the American. There's a little bit of that. But back and forth. Sometimes they'd call me, my wife had to tell me it was an insult. They would call me the Alec. which is a dish rag, but it's an insult that you call Americans. Dish rag. You're insulting. Oh, okay.
Any questions from our far side participants?
Far side.
Okay, would be enough. Okay, any other questions here for the folks in our room? You have any questions for each other?
Well, I do have a question for the rest of you then. What about your experiences when it comes to entering into new culture? Anything when it comes to the diagram or anything, any interesting stories, funny stories that you want to share?
I like the diagram, it makes a lot of sense to me. I went with students to Haiti a couple years ago, and I can see how it works, because, you know, I can't remember how many days we were there, it's been a couple years, so say we were there 10 days. You know, day 5, we all wanted to go home. You know, and I'm just kind of like, I can't remember what day it was, but like there was one day that we were all just ready to, let's go. We went home tomorrow, we'd all be happy. And then when it came like the day to leave, we were all ready to stay. I mean, we didn't want to leave anymore. So it makes sense to me like how, you know, that works.
What were some of the things that made you just want to go back home?
God, it's been too long now. And what's sad is it hasn't even been that long ago.
Same food every day, pretty much.
I don't think that was an issue. She went the year before me, so I think it was more for like, because we always talk about like Haiti time and like you kind of sit around and wait, and I think that can get frustrating. Even though, I mean, we were told to expect that. I think also most of the students wanted to go to the beach, and our leader was like, no, we're not going to the beach, we don't have time, no. And we finally worked it in where we got to go to the beach, so I think by then everyone was happy, so that's why we're like, oh, let's stay. So I think, you know, a little bit of that.
Okay.
When you talked about interacting with, well, being seen as Asian here and white or half mixed or whatever, biracial, right? That's kind of hilarious. But no, it's interesting how that dynamic plays out. So I remember traveling to Paris and interacting with, I think he was black, but he was French, right? And we were talking, and he wanted me to be African, right? So for him, I'm African, right? But for me, even though, you know, we use the term African American, I don't identify as African, right? I have African friends. They're very different. It's a very different experience. Yeah, so just, you know, that idea, and even domestically, I've interacted with Jamaicans, Bahamians, Haitians, right? And it's not nice. It's not friendly. We don't, you know, we might assume that we would get along because we happen to, you know, share a skin tone, but no. At least in my experience, often Black Americans, African Americans are seen as, well, you have this great country and you're not taking advantage of it. And because of my, you know, education, I'm seen as, oh, well, you're a good one, right? not like the rest of those people, right? So yeah, it's just interesting dynamic.
Now in Paris, though, the person who was trying to talk to you in that way, did you push back, or did you say that no?
Well, there was a language barrier, so I was telling my wife to push back, but you know, it wasn't happening. But no, I didn't. I felt that tension. I just said snobbishness, but it was in comparison with how people were in London. So we went to London as well. And one of the reasons I wanted to go is because my cousin, who's in the military, he's, you know, we asked, so what's it like? How do they treat you? And he said, man, it's excellent. They treat you like you're white. And so it was like, okay, you know, that might work, right? So it was, whereas Paris was very different. It was like, when are you guys leaving? That's how I felt, right? So, but I mean.
Well, that may just be the French.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I remember, I mean, they're much better now. But I remember like the 70s and 80s, you know, I'd hear people say, well, the French, they don't like Americans. They just treat us like dirt when we're over there. I go, "No, they do that to each other. Yeah, nothing special."
But did you see that though, Preston, that kind of dynamic between the two groups, like what John was talking about?
I don't know. I know that my son, he works a lot in Africa, and some of the people that work for him are African American. They get over to Africa, and they realize they're not African, right? That they're American, and which means that they have to pay white prices for like haircuts and things like that. But they'll argue, you know. So, but I'm not. No, you're an American.
It's a different rate.
Yeah, my experience is going back home, and I go fairly often, maybe once a year when I go back to Colombia. I go through the honeymoon and the crisis. And especially when it comes to language, I say things and my sisters just laugh. It's like, what did I say? Or I produce money to pay at stores, and the person at the store is like, what are you trying to do? I'm like, it's the money that I had. No, we don't take that. And my sister's like, that got retired a year ago. Like, it'd be nice if I had money. But it's just interesting.
Yeah, Saul said something about how you can end up back in the crisis when you go back because it like he was talking about, damn, this is expensive because his home had changed. And I was wondering if it's that or if it's that you have changed. And so,
They had told me that I am not gringa anymore. But I have been here for 28 years. So yeah, a big part of me is my identity has become this.
Yeah.
But I think I'm talking about assimilation. I feel like I didn't realize how much I had assimilated in the French culture until I took off for a trip. I think I went down to Italy and over to Greece, back up. And it's like when I got back to France, I just felt like I was home. Because I could understand everything that's going on, what people were saying, even if it was not very nice. And so, yeah. I remember when we went, SCC does these trips that are good to do, you know, like we did one Italy, Greece. And so I studied up on my Italian before I went over there. And not a big surprise to me, but when I got over there, I couldn't understand anybody. But finally, you know, I'd been listening to them, and I thought I'm understanding everything these two ladies are saying in the store, and I followed them around. And then it was a little while later, I realized, well, they're speaking French. I thought, oh, the Italian.
Well, when it comes to assimilation, I wasn't trying to assimilate into Korea. Because what assimilation is that you fully adapt to that culture and forget about your subculture or your co-culture. Actually, we no longer use subculture, we say co-culture. And I didn't have any interest. Some people do. They want to assimilate. They want to forget about their co-cultures and fully adapt to the dominant culture. I didn't have any interest in doing that in Korea. I wanted to integrate, meaning adapt to the dominant culture, but keep my culture. Being an American, I want to integrate. Then there are other ones like separation. This is where you create a group or become a part of a group that's not a co-culture and that's not the dominant culture. An example of this is like terrorist groups or extreme religious groups. They would be considered separation. And then there's marginalization. This is where you just are marginalized. You feel like you're alone. You're not a part of any kind of group. And I felt that way at times in Korea, being marginalized.
Well, I guess what I was doing there was integrating, not assimilating.
I did notice, I've gone to Italy as well, and so we went to Rome, and then we went to the island of Sardinia, and there was a drastic difference between Rome and the island. I mean, Rome was kind of more like, you know, like you were saying, ask a younger person, you know, Rome, they didn't really want to help you. It's like kind of dealing Americans, that kind of thing.
You're on the tourist.
But in the island, they were just so much more friendly, and we were always impressed. Like they wanted to like speak English to us, and we went with the impression that we needed to learn Italian and honor their country, but they were very nice to us, and so it was very different, even though it was the same country.
Right.
Two different experiences.
Well, it does bring up the topic, like, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Like, it seems like you were doing that. But then who is responsible? Should we be the who go to that culture, be responsible for fully adapting to their culture, or should they be responsible for somehow accommodating to us, the newcomers?
Depends on how much you pay for the flight.
I think that, like I was indicating earlier, that the newer generation or generations of the French are much different from the older one that's, like the older generation, you walk into a little store, boutique, and it's like they're doing you an honor for being there. And you pick up a book to look at it and they come and say, no.
Yeah.
They pick up the book and they show it to you, it's like,
Wow.
yeah. So, but the younger generation, and I think this is because of this kind of international culture, you've got Euro Disney there, you've got all the American fast foods there now that you didn't have before. And I think what they've learned is that if you're nice with people, they buy things.